Hello and welcome back to Adopt Responsibility. So today we are going to listen to a really useful conversation between Mikhaila Peterson and Jonathan Pageau. First, I have a 1-minute introduction to me and this podcast, and then we'll pretty much get straight into it. Timestamps are below if you would like to skip through. So as for an introduction, my name is Matthew Whedon. My family is composed of my beloved wife, my 2 children who we have adopted, as well as 2 more children who we are just finishing the process of adopting. So I am coming to you from a very divine time of my life. I'm 27 years old. I live on an acreage near a small town in British Columbia. Now this channel is philosophical in nature. It is primarily an avenue for me to pursue wisdom, a forum for my study, as well as a tool for me to gain and share the best view of the world that I can. I believe that by attending to my view of the world through the tools of listening, reading, writing, and occasionally speaking, that I can increase my wisdom and hopefully be a serious net positive for the world and for being. So, let's get into it.
Yeah, actually, let's just start there. So,
Sure.
I don't know if you're going to be able to describe that, but what's the pattern that you found?
And so the best way to understand it is that is the way that Jordan explains it. I think Jordan has a great way of explaining it, which is similar to mine, and it's very easy to understand it that way, which is that the world presents itself to you as too much, right? The world is full of stuff, and there's too much stuff. And everything that you perceive has an indefinite amount of detail. And that detail has, it's infinite detail all the way down, right? And so despite that, for some reason, we're able to perceive unities in our experience, right? I'm able to say that's an apple, but an apple is not one thing, right? An apple is a million things. An apple is millions and millions of things, but I'm somehow able to perceive it as one thing. And so, but I'm also able to perceive parts of things and the unity of things at the same time. We kind of move between the two, right? I can look at a car and I could say, that's a car, but I could also realize, well, that's the wheel of a car, that's this part, that's the paint, that's this. So I can see parts and wholes at the same time. So the question is, first of all, how is that possible? And what does that mean? And so we have a capacity to compress reality into unities. So that happens in space, it happens with objects, but it also happens in time, right? Because time also presents itself to us as an infinite amount. Like, think about all the things that are happening around you right now at this moment, right? There are millions of things happening, but you somehow are able to focus your attention. And then you're also capable of stringing together elements to create a story, to create a connection between different aspects of what's going on. And so that's not arbitrary. That has a pattern. So there's a way in which we are able to recognize that certain events go together and we can recount them as going together. And like I said, it's not arbitrary. So once you start to see it, you realize that, for example, in the Bible, in Genesis, what it's describing as it's describing the creation of the world is something like that. It's something which is helping you experience and delve into the way in which identities exist. And it takes all kinds of forms in different spheres. But let's say in a story, it's usually just like a story has a basic pattern, usually, which is something like you have a beginning point, you have a problem, and then you have a resolution. That's basically every single story is something like that. And then you can play with that, right? You could fail to have a resolution, or you could kind of play with it, but that's the basic pattern. And so you can realize that that's what even like when you're telling your day to your spouse or to your friend, that's what you're doing. You're saying, here's the start of the day, here's a bunch of stuff that happened, and then I came back home, the end, right? Or you can make it smaller, but that's usually the way that pretty much every single story we tell has that pattern.
Okay.
Okay, so much that I want to say. But I'm just going to abbreviate things, and I'm just going to cut it down to the most urgent. Otherwise, this will be a 4 or a 6 hour response video. So what I want to say is The main thing that Pageau brings to the conversation, to the pursuit of truth, is essentially this, and it's massive, which is we are co-creating the world. We see the identity. We realize both in way of we perceive, but also we make real the world. And so there might be something that is an apple there, but we make that into its identity. We make the identities of the world, and that's true of everything. There's not a materialist objective reason that that's an apple, or that this is a table, or that like, why do you classify things exactly in that way? And so this is his view, and so it's extremely useful. Now, I'm gonna just add a couple little introductory notes for anybody listening to this who's not familiar with me. I am very similar to Pageau in my view of the world, which I had been developing for, well, in some ways for a lot of years, but really for about a year or two before I discovered Pageau and before I heard from him. And when I first heard from him, I just thought, oh, he has the language for the thing that I'm trying to give the language to. And so I jumped right in, and I found him and his content extremely useful. So I'd really encourage anybody listening to this, right after listening to this podcast, or even right now, just skip over to Pageau and listen to this podcast. This is a very useful podcast. That's why I'm reflecting on this podcast, is because it's such a good summation, and it takes something that's very tall and it spreads it out very wide. It allows so many people to be gathered in, which is why he is making this video with Mikhaila and on the internet and using YouTube and the technology. The reason he's doing that is because he's trying to, as he ascends the mountain, he is trying to gather and even go down into down the mountain to gather up and to bring more mind, more consciousness up with him. And so one last introductory note. The reason I'm making this particular video as a response to this particular interview, like I could be doing many different interviews, or it's because it is so particularly useful to so many people. So I saw this interview come up as I was studying the CTMU, the cognitive theory of theoretical model of the universe from Langan, which is a theory of everything. As I was studying that, I saw this video come up. I'm like, wow, Mikhaila with Pageau, and I really like Jordan. I really like Jonathan. I haven't listened much to Mikhaila, but I saw that she had posted this, and so I was like, I'm going to listen to that. So I had been drawn from like climbing in understanding, and in a very kind of high esoteric manner, extremely useful. But I saw this video and I listened to it, and I realized that my study of the CTMU, I have like one friend who I shared that with, the CTMU, which is, a lot more esoteric. Then I had like 6 or 8 people that I sent this interview to, some people who I haven't spoken to in a long time. Just, hey, this is really useful. I'd really like if you could listen to this. So that's why I think this one deserves the attention of this podcast. Okay. I know that Pageau continues to explain why this matters, so I'm just going to let it play out for a little bit here.
Does that matter? What does it mean?
Why does it matter? All right. So the reason why it matters is that you realize that the way in which we interact with each other.
Real quick. So let's summarize his first chunk. His first chunk in a sentence is basically that reality and everything, mind and reality, is essentially pattern. It is pattern. There's a pattern that we see, and it's not our like choice to see that. In a very ultimate sense, I'm not going to say it's not our choice, but in the temporal sense, it's not our choice. We are living out the expression of this pattern. Okay, and so that's the case with matter. That's the case with space, and that's the case with time.
Is also like that. So the way that I interact, the way.
Why does that matter? What does it
like?
mean?
Why does it matter? All right. So the reason why it matters is that you realize that the way in which we interact with each other is also like that. So the way that I interact, the way that we interact, like if I interact with you, there is a pattern to that. It's not arbitrary. I can't just say anything, and I can't just do anything. There are certain things which bind our interactions, and that's true of a conversation. It's true, let's say of a family meal, right? A family meal has a pattern. It can't go anyway. If you do something crazy at the dinner table, you'll ruin dinner, right? If you throw your fork on the floor, you ruin dinner. There's a million things you can do to ruin dinner, but we don't. We're able to participate almost like a dance in this pattern, and that scales up. So you can imagine, like, you have these patterns, your interactions with people have these patterns, your family dinner, your community, but that goes all the way up to something which would look like religious rituals.
Quick pause. This is why music is so significant to us. It's because music is pattern, harmoniously on top of pattern, harmoniously on top of pattern. So let's say even something modern like a rock song, you have the pattern of the guitar, the pattern of the notes, the pattern of the frequency, the pattern of the tempo, and you have that entire thing, which by itself is so beautiful. It's like dance. It's like multiple people dancing together in perfect unison. So you have the guitar, then you have the drums, then you have the keyboard, you have the vocals, and the vocals are the top. The word is at the top. And so when you listen to a song, the thing being expressed, if there are words to the song, is the words of the song. That's the expression. That's the identity. And so that's why a song is named after the words that are at the top of the song. Okay. So pattern is inevitable. Another way that I've heard Pageau talk about how socially why pattern matters this is just another example I found useful, is like if you go to meet somebody, the meeting somebody cannot be congruent with lying on the ground on your face. You can't do those two things. So meeting somebody requires a ritual. It requires I shake my hand, I put my hand out, the other person does the same, we shake each other's hand. If you get that off, even just by a smidgen, then meeting that person is corrupted in some sense. And so there's a whole ritual that we follow. So Pageau is saying there's an ultimate ritual, there's an ultimate pattern, and Pageau would use the traditional word God. And I referred to the CTMU. Chris Langan, I might bring up some theories of everything as I'm going through this. I don't know if I will or not. But Chris Langan's theory of everything has that same ultimate pattern. And if I would like it, I would love for Pageau to spend some time. And the thing about Pageau and Peterson is they are so useful to the masses. And they are the process, the Christ-like process of going down and gathering up and bringing up the hierarchy, bringing up the mountain towards God. But I would love for them to. What I want to say is I'd love for them to read the CTMU papers. I'd love for them to have a more comprehensive, like a theory of everything kind of a look at the world. And that might just be my bias because I'm very interested in that. And I'm not saying it's necessarily more useful, but to me, it seems to be. My intuition is that it's extremely useful. And I've found a lot of life transformation through exploring that kind of stuff. So Chris Langan's CTMU has God at the base, which is God is the ultimate identity of everything. God is to the entire universe kind of like my mind is to my body. And so my body is that which animates. My body is that which my mind is that which animates my body. But I can't have mind without body. I can't have body without mind. You can't have, they depend on each other. They completely depend on each other. You can't have heaven without earth. You can't have an idea without its instantiation in the world. What do I mean? Let me use something I wrote just to explain something to Caleb. I actually wrote it. I wish I had it on the paper here. So I'm talking about identity. I'm talking about how heaven and earth relate. So let's take an example of, let's take the example that I wrote on the paper, which is how value relates to what the world is according to us, okay? And it's unavoidable. This is how the world is for a conscious being. This is how the world is for mind. So my highest value, the way I define it is my very highest value is, I'll give it 3 different words: to adopt responsibility. Also, and equally, it's just a different way of saying the same thing, to become love. To promote being. Okay? So to promote being, that's my highest identity. Or sorry, that's my highest goal, okay? Now, that's the one thing, but that doesn't exist in the world. Promote being doesn't exist without instantiation of promote being. So in order to promote being or become love, that value needs to come down and like on lower levels, it can expand and expand and expand until it meets what is below it, until it meets the earth. So let me explain. If promote being is the highest value, then I need to instantiate that in order for it to be real. So let's go down and create some categories of what it means to promote being. So you have promote being and some ways that I can promote being. Now, there may be infinite or near infinite ways. I guess there's not infinite in a limited world. But the ways that I can promote being are, for me right now, I can be a husband and do a great job of that. I can adopt and father children and do a great job of that. I can run a great business. I can yada, 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 including I can, at that level of category, I can do what I'm doing in this podcast, which is pursue wisdom and try and increase the value of my view, as well as share the good view that I can accumulate to myself. Okay. I'll try and be less technical. So you have promote being. Then you have a category of promote being is adopt and father children. But that's still not in the world, is it? That's still in heaven. That's an idea. Now, you have to descend, and you can take that one category, just like all the others, and separate it into more categories. So you have adopt and father children. One of the things, so you have to break that down into categories. You have many categories which make up adopt and father children, and those are lower. It's getting closer to the world, okay? So adopt and father children. Now, what are the categories that make that up? Well, I'm going to play with them. I'm going to feed them. I'm going to teach them how to be social. I'm going to believe in them. I'm going to love them. I'm going to put them to bed. All of these subcategories of what it means to adopt and father children. But those are still ideas. We're descending, but we're still not in the earth. We're still not in the world yet. So descending from heaven to earth, and I'm not saying morally descending, I'm saying descending in terms of instantiation. You have, let's take one of those categories, which is feed my kids, okay? So now we're getting closer to the world. Like promote being, that's way up there. It's way higher. But closer to the earth is feed my kids, okay? Now, from feed my kids, that contains near infinite subcategories. Dog's barking. Okay, distraction. So where were we? How far down have we gotten? We're at feed the kids, okay? So feed the kids can be broken into a bunch of subcategories. You have feed the kids, which means like you actually make the meal, okay? You sit at the table, you distribute the meal, you sit together. Did I say that? You set the table, you take the food and put it into your mouth and chew it and digest it. Okay, so that's all part of feeding the kids, okay? Let's just take one of those subcategories and we can go down. And so you can see that one identity is descending and becoming wider and wider, but closer to the world, okay? So you get to a subcategory of you actually making the meal is, well, you got to make the meal for breakfast, you got to make the meal for lunch, the meal for dinner, and tomorrow and yesterday, yada, yada, yada. What about the meal for dinner tonight? Okay, we're getting close to the world. Making the meal for dinner tonight requires a whole bunch of subcategories, including you take the potatoes out of the fridge, you take the carrots out of the fridge, you put them on the cutting board, you know, all these things that you do. But cooking the potatoes, just as one subcategory, now we're getting really, really close to the world, okay, or to the earth. Cooking the potatoes requires a whole bunch of actions, and that's where we hit the earth. That's where the identity above reaches the earth below, which is you actually have to take that one particular potato and in perfect harmony of so many things, I am taking my hand and using all the systems of my brain and my body and everything working in perfect coordination in the world in this particular moment. I take that particular knife and I push it using my body through that particular potato. And that is how value is instantiated. So is cutting a potato adopting and fathering children? No. The lower thing requires the higher thing in order for it to exist. You can't do anything without it being a part of a value hierarchy. But here's the other thing. Can you promote being without acting it out? No, you can't. You need to instantiate it. And so that's how the world exists. If you want, if the last 2 minutes of what I said seems kind of useful to you, just go on Amazon and buy Matthew Pageau's book, okay? Because it's really helpful to see the world through this lens. Everything that is done is serving some kind of value. That might be a high value or a low value, and that's what this podcast is all about. This podcast is all about figuring out what is the ultimate value and then embodying it, becoming love. Let's keep going.
It is that religious rituals, once you see that the world works that way, the idea of religion it's not silly anymore. Not only is it not silly, it's inevitable. You realize that the world actually lays itself out through rituals and patterns and symbols and stories, and there's no way out of it. And that scales up to something which would look like, let's say for Christians, would look like the Mass or the liturgy, where we have a pattern of interaction, where we all sing together, we all look towards something which is beyond us to unite us together. There's all this movement, these movements that we do that are not in any way superstitious or arbitrary, but they're completely coherent. And they are the highest image of you putting on your socks in the morning, right? Anything you do.
Okay, I will explain what he just said. It's extremely useful. It's the highest image of putting on your socks in the morning. Does that mean that putting on your socks is the same as worshiping or any other religious ritual? Well, it's the same in some ways and it's different in other ways. No, it's not. In the same way that eating spaghetti is not the same as taking communion, okay? It's not about, it's not the same because its identity is not the same. Now, if you assume a materialist ontology, then yeah, eating is, you take the communion and you take the spaghetti. But if you don't assume a materialist ontology, if you assume an identity first ontology, then which I think is completely undeniable. I think that I don't think there's any basis for the materialism of the 1900s and even the 1800s. I don't think there's a basis, and that's why it popped up for a minute, but it will die, and the world will re-enchant, as they talk about later on. And maybe that's this century, maybe that's next century, and maybe it's near the end of everything. Maybe that's part of what destroys, because things get enchanted in the wrong direction. I don't know. But certainly the materialism, I believe, will not survive. I think my children's children will look back at this as the materialism as just one little blip of a silly way of viewing reality. Okay.
Is pattern. And everything you do is a play between a pattern and let's say the potential, the moment in which you're playing. Like if you're brushing your hair, you don't brush your hair in any way. You have to brush your hair in a certain way. And there's variability, but you can't, if you brush your hair with a knife, it's not going to work. You're going to break the pattern. So you realize that the world is ritualized and patterned. And then what it helps us, at least I think it helps us reconnect to a bunch of stuff that people have tossed out and have told us is meaningless and stupid and superstitious. And it can help us reconnect to those things in
a very meaningful way. Okay. Jonathan Vervaeke's series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, his focus on awakening the culture, stealing back the culture. What I believe the answer to the meaning crisis is, and why people in the past, I believe, would have had meaning that we don't have now. They wouldn't have had the issues with suicide and drugs that we have now. The reason is because meaning is to live in purposive relation to value. It is to be down the hierarchy and to do everything at the bottom of the mountain in accordance with the ultimate top, okay? So meaning that's exactly it. And Jordan Peterson talks about how he connects meaning and responsibility, and it's so useful to so many people who don't have that connection. I would put it maybe slightly more technically, but I mean, when I put it more technically, it probably loses 50% of the audience. So I think adopt responsibility is probably the best words he could have given that, okay? He says, all of the meaning that will be found in your life will be in the adoption of responsibility. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's definitely true. And then I basically took it seriously, which is why I live in the world that I live in, why I have the particular house I have, why I like taking that idea seriously is the reason that we adopted the first time, and it's the reason that we adopted the second time. So that's the embodiment. Okay. I lost something I was going to say. Let's just keep listening. Oh, that's right. I might put it a bit more technically is what I was saying. I kind of already did, and I was quoting something I heard from Bishop Barron. Meaning is to live in a purposive relationship to value, and ultimate meaning to be found in life is to live in relation to the ultimate value, the sunum bonum. I don't know exactly how to say the Latin, but so I should probably just stop trying to do that. He calls it the sunum or the summum bonum, which is the Latin word for just supreme good, the very highest of the high, in Chris Langan's terms. Okay, so now I've got Bishop Barron and Chris Langan in sentences right next to each other. In Chris Langan's turn, while he uses the word God, global operative descriptor, which is the ultimate identity of all of reality, the ultimate identity of the world. And so maybe I should mention Chris's CTMU. Let me be clear, I don't understand the CTMU. I've studied the CTMU. I love the CTMU. It is my favorite theory of everything. But I am an extremely ignorant human being. I am very curious, but I am not some above average intelligence kind of like, explain everything to everybody. No, I've just spent a long time. I think I Maybe if anything, I might be able to see the value of things really well, but I'm not able to understand them. I don't have high IQ, cognition, whatever. And I don't mind that. I don't think there's any problem with that. That's not my role. I'm not jealous. I'm not angry about that. So in my very basic way of understanding the CTMU, it is just that there are basically three different, I don't have the language, so I apologize. And I would just encourage you, if you're interested, to just research it yourself. And a great place to start, well, maybe not start, but near the beginning would be Chris Langan's interview with Curt Jaimungal, who was just on my channel recently. Okay. So he has three different levels of what's going on, of everything. His theory of everything is God at the top, and that is the global operative descriptor. It is the ultimate identity of the universe. And then he has the middle level, which is all of us. It's the distribution of God. It's the distributed cognition. I don't know if he would be comfortable with those words, but he's not making this video, I am, and I'm very basic. So the distributed cognition of God. And so in order for God to see the world, he needs something to see through, and that's us. And then from us, we use the actual world, time, space, matter, and so we are identifying using the external world. We are this meeting of heaven, which is God, and earth, which is below. And those come together with us, okay? So we are the joining of those. We take the earth, the things below, which are not just dead matter. Chris Langan calls it telons, that the world is made up of telons. And even those, even the telons, this is not like a material way of just defining the world. It's not that like telons are smaller than quarks or something. No, but they have a narrative to them. So they have something they're pursuing, which is unity. But they can't do it without us, and we can't do it without God. Okay, just like I explained before, the value being instantiated at lower categories, and then there's a bottom level that things are taken up into unity. So God is the unity of everything. We are the process of God. This isn't something that happened temporally, but I have to say it temporally in order to make a story. So God distributed from unity God to distributed God, and then distributed God is unifying back to unity. That's the process that we get to be a part of in our consciousness. Okay, let's keep going.
I think in maybe a little more conscious way, but a way that can help solve the problem of meaninglessness and disenchantment and nihilism that is around us.
Okay. So I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to have to sit on that for a bit. I think I had a weird experience. I had a crazy experience this summer where
That's what I hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why we're talking.
Yeah.
Is I got criticized because I said I found God, and apparently you're not supposed to say that. But
who said you're not supposed to say that?
I don't know. People on the internet.
Yeah, don't pay attention to the YouTube comments.
But I think so. You're talking about. So I think what did it for me was there were too many. I'd like to think of myself as like logical, very logical. So I've tried to put the world I've tried to understand the world through science and facts and.
Just gonna make a quick pause in response to what Mikhaila is saying. And what Pageau just said. Pageau said, don't pay attention to the YouTube comments. My little note would just be, I absolutely agree. The more you attend to the things that are lower and not good, the more they'll grow. You attending to them makes them grow. Which I'll just add as a note. I'm not going to talk through, like I said, because I'm just not smart enough to. But that reminds me of Wheeler's participatory universe. Peterson's actually mentioned that a couple times. Chris Langan talks about it quite a bit, and he really likes it. It's very congruent with the CTMU. The participatory universe, and when Peterson talks about that, if you've heard a lot of Peterson, you've talked about how some physicists in the last couple decades have realized, well, so to speak, they've theorized, and he's talking about Wheeler. I think we have some kind of animal, which would almost for sure be a whitetail, but our dog is distracting me. Okay, so I'm back. So Wheeler's participatory universe is, if you've heard Peterson talk about it, he just explains there's nothing that is there until somebody is conscious of it. Okay, and so Wheeler talks about how there's the star that's out there. It's not actually there until we see it. And so if you hear that and you think that's silly, it's because that's your materialist ontology assumptions talking, okay? So if you think that reality is its matter and we are just like watching it like a movie and it was already there, and if all the consciousness of the universe disappeared, that there would still be something here, you're wrong. There's no way. I believe you're wrong. I think that the theories for consciousness are a lot more compelling. Let me not be too offensive. You might be right, but like I said, I don't think materialism will last. I don't think that physicalism will last. Okay. So the star doesn't exist until you see it, because we as seers, and as consciousness, we identify things. So we identify that star. So in the same way, I would say that if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, did it still make a sound? The answer is no. So if you have a problem with that, just think about what sound is and think about how it's necessary for consciousness in order for there to be sound. How do you get, what is the sound that's happening? You think that there's an objective reason that that a tree is a tree? Like, what makes it a tree? Why are the particular atoms or the particular quarks or the particular energy that make up that tree, why is that a tree? Like, what you're saying, if you say it made a sound, is you're saying there's a story, which is that tree fell and it made a sound. It's like, well, that's just a story. That's not objective. There's nothing objective about that. You don't get to categorize things in that particular way. If you want to more insight into that, watch Pageau's video. He explains very well. The video is called "There is no literal meaning." There's another one called "Symbolic versus Literal Worldview." I think it's called something like that. And so, yeah, he explains it really well, better than I could in those videos. But if the tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? No. I would say no. I don't think that there's a consistent way to explain that there is something of sound without consciousness.
Kind of devoid of intuition. And I think I learned that from my dad. And it took me a while to build back the intuition side and to actually take that seriously, because I thought, well, if you can't figure it out in your head, then it's not real, which is completely overestimating your ability to figure things out. But I think part of what did it for me this summer was that was this pattern that you're talking about, right? And I kind of tuned into it, you know what's been going on with my family. It's been completely absurd. But there have been things that have happened that are just too weird to explain any other way. Like when mom was sick, it was like being in a movie. Like my entire life has been being in a movie, which you could say is like being in a story. But when my mom...
Okay, what is she saying? It's like being in a story. Yes, that's what our life is, okay? So it's like being in a story. And it comes to us automatically. We can't avoid that we are in the story, and we can't avoid the story, seeing the story if it's right in front of us. Here's the example I like to use. If you put every person in the world in front of a screen and you played a movie, I always use the example of The Dark Knight, okay? You play The Dark Knight in a movie theater and every single human in the world is watching that, and you ask them at the end, what happened? They will all tell you essentially the same infinite amount of details that was on the screen. They will take it into themselves, following the pattern of reality, okay? Following the pattern, they will funnel it into themselves and they will give it identity. The identity is hero, fall, rise even higher, and that's the end. It's glorious. That's what life is. That's what we see, and we can't help but see it. There is not a single person, when you ask them, all billions of people in the world who watched this movie in my thought experiment, there's not a single person who is going to say, well, the third pixel from the very top left was green 82 times. Nobody will say, but why not? If it's a materialist world, then that's what happened. How come we identify things in the way that we do? That's the question. And that's the question that Pageau and Chris Langan answer.
Mom got sick. She knew the day she was going to get better. And it was like.
So Mikhaila is finding God because she's, in her words, beautifully, she is tuning in. That's what she said. She says it twice. Tuning into the pattern. And that's such a good, useful way to explain it. It's like the pattern is there. It's like a radio signal, just like right now in my house. It doesn't appear to me that there's a radio frequency and there's a beautiful song actually in this room. But if I was to take a radio and stick the antenna up and tune it just right, then I would get this beautiful, harmonious song, and it would coordinate with me, okay? And all of a sudden, between me and this radio and the world and the radio waves and all these infinite different levels of categorization, there's going to be identity. And it's something that I couldn't even stop if I wanted to. So she's saying, and she says it so well, she's tuning in to the pattern. She's finding God. What a great title.
Well, that's not, you literally can't explain that. Nobody could explain it. None of the doctors could explain it. And it was mom and dad's anniversary. And so everybody in my family was just kind of like, well, put that in the pile of things we just cannot understand at all. So that occurrence has just been like, I've just been thinking about that, just being like, how do I understand that in a logical way? And then when my dad got sick, so he was reacting to the medications he was put on terribly. That was January. I thought, this is going to be awful. I had this weird feeling like this is going to be absolutely awful for 2 years. Right. And I was like, I can run away, because I was considering moving. I was like, I could just, this is really difficult. We didn't know what to do. This is really bad. I was like, I could just run away, or.
Sorry to interrupt. Running away would be, in my view, in that situation, running away would just be the same as attending to the crap fest of YouTube comments too much. It's the same thing.
It's going to take 2 years and it's just going to be like crippling. And I was like, okay, I can do that. It's just 2 years, right? Out of a lifetime, we can do 2 years. And then it was like spot on, where things were really awful and then everything just fixed themselves. And so those two things happened. And then there were just too many things like that happened that felt like I've been, I don't know, living in a story. And so I don't know if that aligns with anything you've said, because I'm having a difficult time exactly understanding what you mean. But does that make sense at all?
No, it makes sense.
Just keep asking, keep seeking, keep asking, keep pursuing, and the understanding comes. And it's not about, you don't have to be smart. It's just not about that. Like, I mean what I said. I don't think that it has to do with some people are more cognitively able and then they can absorb it. No, it's about, what do you attend to? If you want it, attend to it. Ask, knock, seek.
I think that most people have these moments, and it's true that it often happens. You can understand that this pattern of reality, it's actually reasonable, but it always points towards something which is a little bit beyond itself, like beyond reason, you could say. So often we have these crazy experiences, we could call them miracles, or we could call them that reveal to us something which is beyond what's going on in everyday life. Like it seems to kind of connect everything together in a way that is very difficult to fully account for at the lower level. And I really believe that this is just how the world works. Like this is really how reality works. Like reality is made with meaning. Like you could say that a good way to understand is that God really does fill up the world. And there are moments where we can have these things just completely come together, and you have a sense that, not only a sense, but it's like your whole being is carried up, let's say, for a moment. And it doesn't always last very long. You know, some people it lasts longer, thank goodness for them. But for most of us, it's like a moment where you feel carried up and you're like, okay, I can't deny that. Like, I can't deny what's happened.
It was ridiculous. And even my parents commented on it. They're just like, things work out for Julian, but everything you do, whatever could go wrong, goes wrong. And so I just lived my life like that. It was just like, it was awful. I kind of got used to it. You never get used to that. It's still frustrating. And then I got better, and I had that shift where it was just like my world flipped upside down, and I associated it with health. I was just like, is this what it feels like to be healthy? But it was a really physical feeling of going in the wrong direction and then having things switch, and things were just working out. I was on time all the time. Like if I missed an assignment, there'd be a delay, and when it was due, it was things that didn't make sense, right? And so that was the first time I experienced that. And then I went off of my antidepressants. Those were the last things I stopped taking. And I lost that. And then everything was awful again for a number of years. And I just...
So they're going to talk about how Pageau is going to mention how, people can have a more bipolar, like way up, way down kind of a life. And other people might have a bit more of a stable life. And Mikhaila seems to be kind of like psychologically how people can have bipolar mental disorders or whatever. Some people might have just a life that's a lot more bipolar, way up, way down. I think what's useful about this is to realize, and it takes you turning off that materialist kind of science way of viewing the world, but you really should turn that off, is to realize that when it rains, it pours in life. And so if things are going poorly, and I've been there, when things are going poorly, sometimes you just, as it starts to rain, you need to realize when it rains, it pours, and you just need to hunker down and survive. And you don't need to be newly shocked every time that it starts raining harder. Now it's the same thing on the other side. When things are going well, when things are going up a lot, you want to use that going up, and like you want to distribute it out further. You don't just want to like, oh, things are going well, okay, let me just take it as high as I can go. And I would say that's, in a roundabout way, that's basically my view of why I don't think psychedelics are a good path, because it's like you're trying to just fly up to the top. And so as you don't want to fly up to the top. You want to walk up to the top so that when you get there, you can sustain it, so that you can be there. Okay. And so I think that, just as a note, like I think psychedelics might give great understanding, but Jung says beware. Well, he has a document that he titled "Beware of Unearned Wisdom," and I would say I don't deserve to quibble with Jung, but I would say, rather than beware of unearned wisdom, wisdom is not unearned. Knowledge can be unearned. So beware of unearned knowledge. Wisdom is actually what you do want. Here's an example. If my job is to hike and I fly to the first plateau and I get a great vista from there, that's awesome. I get to see the vista, I get to see so clearly. But if I didn't hike to get there, then I don't have the strength to continue. I don't have the strength that I needed that was developed in the climbing of the mountain. So I've used that analogy, and I think Pageau could use that analogy. I think that it's a tool that would be useful for him, because he's starting to become one of the main people talking about psychedelics, and he's finding a lot of great language for why we can't condone it necessarily, and it's not something to be taken as lightly as our culture is right now. And so when Jung says about psychedelics, beware of unearned wisdom, I would say beware of unearned knowledge. What you actually want is wisdom. You want the story understanding of why things are the particular view that they are. So what does it mean to climb a mountain? To climb a mountain is to take a wide path at the bottom, and it narrows necessarily because as you climb, the geometry of our planet works out in such a way that as you climb a mountain, the path necessarily narrows. But your view widens, okay? Which is why I love that my last name is Widen. And that I literally live on a mountain. We live on a mountain that is as steep as it could possibly be. And that's the land that we were able to get last year. It's literally just a big 15-acre plot of the side of a south-facing mountain. And so you just hike, you go straight north, and it goes straight up. That's our whole land. And so, distracted. What am I trying to say? As you climb, I got too personal there. As you climb, the path narrows, okay? But the view widens. So the path towards heaven is narrow. The path down the mountain is wide and widening and reciprocal closedness. Okay? Because why? And what do I mean by reciprocal closedness? I'm stealing Vervaeke's term. He talks about reciprocal openness and reciprocal closedness. I think he has a different term for closedness, sorry. But he talks about how when things start to close, they close more and more and more. It compounds. Here's an example. Alcoholism. Say you're having a bad day. You could respond by looking up and being like, here's my yes. I can still say yes to ultimate good, even in this place that I'm having a bad day. Or you can act in opposition to that. You can say no. And you can say, I'm having a bad day and I'm going to have some alcohol. And that's, I'm not going to adopt the responsibility needed to make it through this bad day. I am going to say no. You can look down, okay? So when you look down, your view gets smaller, but when you take that alcohol, say you have an alcohol problem, and you're having a bad day, you take the alcohol. What does that do? It makes your life worse, because when you take the alcohol, you become an alcoholic. That's the way that things work. And so things start closing, and all of a sudden it's like, man, my life sucks even more because now I'm an alcoholic. And so now I'm going to take out a bunch of debt to try and help myself out of the situation as I drink my alcohol. And then all of a sudden you're in debt and an alcoholic, and then you lose the house. And then it's like things get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse in your experience. Well, it's the same thing when you climb. And this is something Jordan talks about in different language than I'm using. But when you make any aim towards the greatest good, that will compound. And I have experienced both of those so much. My life right now is very high. Like I said, we've just finished the process of adopting, or we're just finishing the process. And so I'm in a moment of divinity. I am in a moment that's so high and heavenly. And as I go up, as I adopt responsibility for the world, and I take voluntarily, in the model of Christ, voluntarily take suffering upon myself for the sake of ultimate being, not just for the sake of the reduction of suffering of others, which is good and comes with my focus on God, but the goal is not just reduction of suffering. I need to promote being. That's why if all I wanted to do was reduce suffering, like secular morality would suggest, that like the moral landscape from Sam Harris's book is about, is his moral view is basically like, well, we can take suffering and we can create morality by making objective statements about subjective experience of suffering. And so he says, because there is suffering, and I think this is extremely useful to view, but it's not the whole view. It doesn't give all of morality. He says, because there is suffering, now we have morality. Well, that's not good enough, because the logical answer to stop suffering would be to just nuke the world and kill everybody. What? You think that's bad? As a secular person listening to this, if you think that's bad, you need to really think about that. I would say that you really need to think about that. And so if being is good, then the question is why? And that's a much higher question than why is suffering bad? And so all I'm trying to say in that whole spiel is that non-existence is not better than existence. I'm saying that being is morally good, that being is better, even if it means more suffering. Morality, Pageau says something that, man, this actually didn't rub me the wrong way, but I didn't understand it when I first heard. And I just wrestled with something I heard him say. He said, morality is not about the reduction of suffering. And I was sitting there thinking, then why the flying F am I adopting these kids? Is it not to reduce the suffering? And it's not like I decided to adopt because I exclusively want to reduce suffering. I just didn't have the words for why I was adopting. And I knew that it was the right thing. But I think now I can see, as Pageau says, it's not just the reduction of suffering. There's something higher, which is the promotion of being and the growth of existence and the growth of love. And so the highest thing is not, if I had one wish, it wouldn't be that nobody suffered. It would be that we could all have the highest form of existence, that we would all become God.
And last Sunday we went to, it was a gospel kind of group of people. So they were singing in one of the bars on Broadway. So that's what we did Sunday. But that made me cry. Like they'd sing a song and then they talk a little bit. And then they sing a song and talk a little bit. So there was something there that really spoke to me. So we're just hopping around trying to find a place. Mostly what I've been doing is praying and reading the Bible.
I feel compelled to make this little statement. This is going to be very on my Protestant side to say this. But for Mikhaila, I would say for somebody just wanting introduction to that alignment, I would like to encourage someone to just focus on Jesus. And for me, just reading about Jesus, just reading about the resurrection definitely does it. For me, what that meant a few months ago was to put an image of Jesus, the Christ, the Anointed One, the ideal of humanity, on the central space in our home. And so in our home, in our living room, which is the center space, even when you walk in the front door, you basically walk into the living room. And in the living room, there's one wall that has all the light cast on that one spot. We put an image of Christ. It's actually an image of him washing the feet of his disciples. And I would say you can put an image of him on the wall of your home. That's for sure. And man, would that be a good idea. But otherwise, you could also look up an image and just listen, say in headphones, to some sort of meditation on Christ at the same time. And what I'm just saying, you can use your different senses to focus in on Christ. And I don't know if I've ever done that without experiencing that coming into alignment that Mikhaila is talking about. And so there's many different ways to dive in and to focus on Christ. But I don't know if in my entire life I've ever done something like that and not have had it transform me and not had Christ go to the hell within me and draw it up and pull it towards the Father. And so, yeah, you could look up an image of Christ. I mean, even now, that'd be a lot better than listen to me talk. You could just look up an image and look at it. I mean, the phone is kind of nice. If you want to use a phone or a screen, that's fine. It's great because, as Pageau talks about, the light literally will be in the image, and you will be capturing both the light and the experience of having light come through the image of Christ like a stained glass window. And you can listen to a song like a very Protestant version. This is the one that came to mind, so I'm going to say it. I believe I will. I believe I should. It's a song that has wrecked me at many points in my life. It's called "With Arms Wide Open" by Misty Edwards. You listen to that song and you look at an image of Christ, especially an image of Christ on the cross. And yeah, you'll definitely have your being pulled in. Pulled into unity. That would be way on the Protestant side. Like I said, we'll get into those different avenues and those different lenses as we go on.
Yeah. So why, if there are ways you can act in order to align yourself properly, I guess we could.
Let me just say this section coming up, for most people who believe, let me say for anybody who's really philosophically minded, pay attention to everything Pageau is about to say about suffering.
Speak like that, something like that. Why would those kind of bad experiences, like, and a more hellish version of life, exist for children? If they're like, what's with that?
Yeah. What I'm going to say is going to be, it's hard because I don't want to diminish suffering, but so let's take you, because I'm talking to you, that I could tell you that without that, you wouldn't have had that experience.
Yeah. So it just takes time.
It's just that suffering can become, for some, if you're able to align it, like if you're able to embody it properly, suffering can become an opportunity for transformation and an opportunity for something which is higher, you could say. And so that's actually one of the differences between the way Christians tend to see disability or suffering compared to some other traditions, which is that there's a story, where Christ heals a blind person, and people ask him, like, why is he blind? Is it because his parents sinned? Is it because he sinned? Like, what evil happened so that this person be blind? And Christ heals him, but his answer is even more important. He says, no, this person is blind to show the glory of God. That is, that there's something about suffering that it can be transformed into something greater. And I think, like, I remember Jordan having an intuition of that once when we were in Montreal and we were going to see the totem pole that was put up by his brother, and he said that he had suffered quite a bit, and that suffering had been refined into gold, and that's what his art was, basically. And so I was like, Jordan.
Charles was Charles the one who said that?
Jordan said that about Charles.
Wow.
Yeah, he said his suffering, he suffered a lot, like he really suffered, but that suffering has been kind of transformed into beauty, transformed into something that is higher. And so not everybody's an artist, but you can see, if you met people that have suffered a lot, and I'm someone who actually hasn't suffered much, but like if you meet people that have suffered a lot and they have suffered well, I don't know how else to say it, or suffered in a way that is like a yes, I don't know how, they tend to have a specific magic about them, which is hard to describe, right? They tend to have a kind of glory, a kind of something about them which is hard to, which transcends the normal world. And so I think that's, it's not that God causes suffering, is that suffering, the Christian way to describe it, that suffering is part and parcel of the world of the fall, right? And that in the world of the fall, suffering is the thing we need to deal with, but that God is able to transform suffering into something else. Okay. And that's what the cross is. Like, that's what Jesus on the cross.
So the first Buddhist dictum is life is suffering. That's true, as long as what you mean by life is not ultimate reality, but just this limited temporal space, then as long as there's limitation, then there will be suffering. Suffering is the expression of limitation.
Okay.
And that's what the cross is. Like, that's what Jesus on the cross means. That it's God transforming suffering into something which is more. But it's hard to talk about because it's like, I don't want people to think that I'm trying to delegitimize suffering, or I'm trying to diminish this type of suffering that people live. But I think that at least in my experience, when I met people that have suffered and have endured or transcended, they are way more than people that haven't.
I would say also, if like I've suffered quite a bit, and I think the only way, this was before any type of Christianity, how I kind of figured it out. And I thought the only way that could be worth it, whatever worth it means, would be if other people don't have to experience it, right? If I just quantified it and I could help other people not experience that, then it would even out. It'd be like, whatever that meant. And so that's how I kind of figured it out.
Yeah. Amazing. And Pageau is like, because I'm like, because that is dead on. That's amazing. And it's funny that she says this was before any kind of Christianity. No, that was the Christianity. That was Christ.
That's a great way to understand it. And you can see it like at many, many levels where, like, who's the person helping out alcoholics the most? It's always an ex-alcoholic, right? Who's the person helping, abuse victims? Who's the person helping people who suffer? It's usually someone who has suffered. And so there's a way that you can see that, like, it really is this image of transforming suffering into blessing, transforming suffering into something else, which is actually manifesting the compassion, God's compassion in the world through us, right? We always ask ourselves, like, why is God doing this, or why is God not doing this? And the answer is, we are the body of the divine in the world. We are the hands and feet of God. And so,
okay. So I know my wife's coming home with kids in not too long, so I know that I have to wrap up pretty soon. So I'm going to make a bit of an appeal. This is everything that Pageau is saying, and even what Mikhaila just said. This is my worldview. Adopt responsibility. This is my view. It is a moral view. It is, but how do you justify your moral view? We can't deny that reality is both mind and matter, okay? If there is mind and there is matter, then the mind, the conscious agency, the will, the conscious awareness, sentience, agency, that mind has to act in the world. We are already in the story. It's just a matter of, are you going to try and promote being and promote existence, or are you going to try and destroy and try and cause non-existence, and hate God and hate unity and disunify? And those are acts of the will that we are forced to make a decision about. Every moment of your conscious life, you are making decisions about what's valuable. And so our job is to call what's most valuable, most valuable. Our job is to identify things properly in alignment with what the real pattern is. Our job is to embody that. And so we are forced to act in the world. We are mind. We don't know what that all means. We don't have all the answers for what's going on, but we're definitely mind inside of a world in which we have to act. When we wake up to consciousness in the morning, or as a civilization, or as a person who's born. But let's just use the cycle of the day. It's all the same kind of, it'll work. The cycle of the day works. You wake up in the morning to consciousness, out of the potential and the chaos and the dormancy. When you wake up in the morning to consciousness, you have to act in the world. You have to either choose to sleep in or choose to put your feet on the ground. And then when you choose to put your feet on the ground, you have to either go to the bathroom because you have to go pee, or go eat some food, or go wake up the kids. And then every choice that you ever make is a battle between heaven and hell. And the angels and demons are warring eternally around us for heaven or hell to be made manifest. Let me not say that. Let me not say it like that. They're warring eternally for either being and the promotion of being, or the destruction of being. And so what we do is we wake up and we're on the side of a mountain, and we either are going to go up the mountain or down the mountain. But it has to be embodied. So right now, like this whole listening to me talk, I'm just feeding propositions. It's like propositional after propositional, and maybe a little bit of participating. And, even listening to me, I think there's even going to be some procedural kind of knowledge that gets passed along. But you have to actually own it. You have to do it yourself. And so if you think, let's say that if you think the things that Pageau is saying, the things that I am saying about reality are correct, that we need to promote being, that we need to become love, that we need to, what was my third one? Adopt responsibility. If that's the highest goal, then you need to start embodying it. And yeah, that's the purpose. And so my view and my philosophy is a moral philosophy. It's you have to become love. That's the path. There's no better way, I think, than to say it like that. You become love. Okay. And the rest of the podcast that they do is really good. You should really listen to it. I'm not going to have the time. Shawnee and the kids are about to get back home pretty soon here. So I'm going to start to close things out. The only thing I would add, just as a question, I always want to finish with a question. So something that Pageau is about to say is he's about to say he wished that the Reformation didn't happen. And I would just ask, like, how does he really mean that? Like, and I know that you can kind of half mean things and it can be true. And the ultimate version of I wish it didn't happen, maybe he doesn't mean that. But to me, like the way that I view reality, wishing that anything in the past had been different is just like questioning God's authority, or it's like questioning God's morality or something like that. And so, I think it's a sin to wish that it's an error to wish that something in the past had been different. And so my question would be, it would basically be like, do you agree with that? Do you think that's the right view? And what I mean is not just in this temporal way. I mean like in an ultimate way. Obviously, I could say, I wish that, and insert any bit of suffering that's ever happened. But it's like, well, if you believe, if Pageau believes that suffering is part of God's plan to ultimately get to the highest good, then isn't it a sin to wish that some of that story hadn't happened? That would kind of be my question. I'm going to stop there. So thank you so much.